The ancient ford, a relic of my youth, groaned as it crested the final rise, spilling me into the familiar, unsettling embrace of Oakhaven. Below, the town lay like a forgotten promise, nestled in a bowl of weary hills, its houses a mosaic of faded paint and weathered timber. The air, even through closed windows, seemed to carry the scent of damp earth and something else. Something metallic and cold, like old rain on rust. I hadn't seen this place in 15 years, not since the day I packed my meager belongings and fled the suffocating silence of my grandmother's house. Now her cryptic death had pulled me back, a hook in the soft tissue of my past. The sky above was a bruised canvas, heavy with unspoken threats. No birds circled, no distant hum of machinery drifted up from the valley. It was the kind of quiet that felt less like peace and more like a held breath. This quiet, however, was different. It was an absence, a vacuum. As I descended the winding road, the asphalt cracked and patched like scarred skin. The old general store, Miller's Mercantile, loomed first, its sign peeling. I remembered the bell above its door, a cheerful jingle that announced every entrance. Today the bell was gone, or perhaps merely silent, for no sound issued from within. The call from the undertaker had been brief, clinical, devoid of any genuine condolence. He had simply stated the facts. A fall, an old woman, a quiet passing. But the words had carried a flat, almost rehearsed cadence that still echoed in my mind, a subtle discordance. It lingered for only a breath, a phantom echo of a space I hadn't been to, but which felt disturbingly familiar in its sterile desolation. I steered the car through the narrow main street. The storefronts, once vibrant with local crafts and the promise of small-town life, now stared blankly. There were no children playing in yards, no elderly residents tending to their meager gardens, no dogs barking. Oakhaven felt preserved, not in amber, but in ice. A figure emerged from the post office, a woman I vaguely recognized as the postmistress, though her face, when she turned, was a stranger's. Her eyes, once bright and inquisitive, were now like polished stones, reflecting nothing. Her movements were slow, deliberate, each step precise, almost mechanical. She didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge the presence of a foreign vehicle on her street. She simply walked, a perfectly straight line, until she disappeared around the corner of the bakery, which, I noted, had no lights on. My unease began to coalesce into something sharper, something with teeth. This wasn't just quiet. It was too quiet. It was the quiet of a stage waiting for an audience, or perhaps a predator waiting for its prey. I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the undeniable certainty of being observed. I glanced into my rearview mirror, seeing only the empty street behind me, stretching back towards the hills. No other cars, no figures. It looked exactly as I remembered it, yet utterly alien. My grandmother had been a woman of routine, of sharp words and even sharper observations. He would have noticed the unnerving stillness, the vacant eyes of the townsfolk. Would she have understood it? The porch swing, once a constant creak, hung motionless. The wind chimes, usually a delicate melody, were utterly still. It was as if Oakhaven itself had forgotten how to breathe. I stood there for a long moment, my hand on the cold metal of the car door, my gaze sweeping over the silent houses, the dormant storefronts, the empty streets. The feeling of being watched intensified, pressing in from all sides. It wasn't the casual curiosity of a small town. It was something deeper, more ancient, a collective gaze that felt like a slow, deliberate assessment. I was a disruption, an anomaly in their newfound stillness. It was something else entirely, and it was waiting. The funeral was a muted affair, a whisper of a ceremony held beneath the skeletal branches of a weeping willow in the old cemetery. My grandmother's casket, a simple pine box, rested on the raw earth, an open wound in the manicured grass. The handful of townsfolk gathered were ghosts, their faces etched with a weariness that seemed to predate their years. They stood apart, a scattered congregation, their gazes unfocused, like statues carved from old wood. No tears fell, no shared grief rippled through the small assembly. Just a profound, unsettling quiet. I searched their faces, trying to find the vibrant threads of memory that tied me to this place, to them. There was the baker, his hands still dusted with phantom flour, though his shop had been closed for years. The librarian, her spectacles perched on her nose, though the library itself had long been reduced to a dusty annex in the community hall. And the old fisherman, his cap pulled low, the scent of brine clinging to his worn jacket. They were all here, yet none of them truly were. After the brief, almost perfunctory words from the town elder, a man whose voice was a rasp of dry leaves, I approached the baker first. His name, a forgotten melody, eluded me, but his kind smile, always ready with a sugary bun, was a fixture of my childhood. "It's Cole," I offered, extending my hand. "My grandmother's grandson." His eyes, a watery blue, blinked slowly. He took my hand, his grip surprisingly limp. "Cole," he murmured, the name sounding foreign on his tongue. "A young man, from a long time ago." He paused, his gaze drifting over my shoulder, as if searching for something just out of sight. "Your grandmother. He was a good woman. Always around." His words were hollow, devoid of warmth or specific recollection. "Do you remember when she used to bring you her prize-winning apple pie every autumn festival?" I prompted, a small test. He frowned, a faint tremor running through his brow. "Pie? Yes, she baked." He was a baker, I think. Or perhaps that was someone else. He trailed off, his eyes losing focus again, fixed on a distant point beyond the cemetery gates. The metallic tang in the air seemed to sharpen. I moved to the librarian. His face was a network of fine wrinkles, him silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. "It's Cole," I repeated, my voice a little less confident now. "I used to spend my summers in your library, reading about dragons and distant lands." He peered at me, his head tilted slightly, like a bird considering a foreign object. "Dragons," he echoed, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. "Yes, children read. Books. There were books." Her memory seemed to be a series of disconnected images, devoid of narrative flow. "Your grandmother." He was quite particular about overdue books. Always returned them on time. Or did she? She squinted, her brow furrowed in concentration, then shook her head gently. No, that wasn't her. That was another. The air grew heavy around me, a silent pressure. The unease began its slow, insidious crawl. I tried the old fisherman, his face weathered like ancient rock. "I used to help you bait your traps, remember? Down by the old dock." He grunted, pulling his cap lower. "Traps, yes, fish, there were fish." His eyes, like chips of obsidian, met mine briefly, then darted away. "Your grandmother. She liked the sea. Or was it the mountains? The wind, perhaps. She liked the wind." Each encounter was a variation on the same theme. Vague recognition, generalized memories, and a strange, almost universal inability to recall specifics, especially about my grandmother. The recollections of her were fragmented, contradictory, as if pieced together from a dozen different, poorly remembered lives. A sudden, dizzying wave washed over me. The cemetery ground seemed to tilt, the gravestones blurring into indistinct gray shapes. For a moment, a different scene overlaid the quiet burial ground. A long, sterile corridor, the floor a pale, polished sheen reflecting a distant, flickering fluorescent. A dim hospital hallway with no staff, machines quietly breathing. The rhythmic pulse of unseen apparatus, the soft sigh of vents, the utter absence of human sound. It vanished as quickly as it came, leaving me swaying, disoriented, the metallic tang in the air now sharp, almost painful. I forced myself back to the present, the faces of the townsfolk now seeming less like individuals and more like components of a single, muted organism. Their movements were slow, their responses uniform in their vagueness. They spoke of my grandmother as a collection of indistinct traits, a placeholder rather than a person. I was back then, helping with the cleanup. He paused, his hands clasped before him, knuckles white. "The mill," he intoned, his voice flat. "Yes, fires. There are always fires." And then, quiet. He offered no specifics, no shared memory of the smoke, the heat, the collective effort to save what little remained. It was then I understood. This wasn't just forgetfulness or the natural decay of aging minds. This was a pervasive, insidious erosion. Their memories weren't merely fractured, they were assimilated, blended into a bland, generalized past that served everyone and no one. The townsfolk of Oakhaven were not merely changed, they were being erased, their individual stories slowly dissolving into a vast, silent consciousness, leaving only empty vessels behind. And my grandmother's cryptic death, her fractured notes, suddenly pulsed with a new, terrifying urgency. The air in Grandmother Alara's house was a thick shroud woven from dust and the silence of long-held breaths. Each floorboard groaned a tired lament beneath my boots as I moved, a symphony of decay that felt more like a warning than a welcome. The scent of old paper and something subtly metallic, like forgotten copper coins, clung to the wallpaper, a pale floral pattern that seemed to wilt further with every passing hour. My task, to sift through the remnants of a life now extinguished, felt less like an obligation and more like an archaeological dig into a forgotten tomb. I started in the study, a room where the light struggled to penetrate the grime-streaked panes. Bookshelves, heavy with volumes whose spines had cracked with age, lined the walls, their contents whispering forgotten narratives. I ran my hand along a row of leather-bound tomes, the dust motes dancing in the weak light that managed to pierce the gloom. Here, amongst the brittle pages and the scent of forgotten thoughts, I sought some clarity, some fragment of the woman I barely knew, a woman whose cryptic demise had pulled me back to this estranged town. My grandmother had always been a creature of meticulous habits, a woman who filed away not just documents, but moments, memories, and perhaps secrets. I remembered her sharp, discerning eyes, always observing, always collecting. It was this memory that led me to her old writing desk, a heavy oak piece scarred with generations of use. The drawer slid open with a mournful sigh, revealing neatly stacked bills, faded photographs of unfamiliar faces, and a collection of dried pressed flowers, their colors muted to melancholic browns and grays. I worked methodically, my fingers tracing the grain of the wood, feeling for any irregularity. It was in the deepest drawer, beneath a false bottom that lifted with an almost imperceptible click, that I found it. Tucked away, wrapped in a piece of oilskin, lay a book. Not a typical journal, but something far older, far more personal. Strange, angular symbols, carved with an unsteady hand, adorned its surface, twisting like roots seeking purchase in stone. They were alien to me, yet held a primal resonance, a sense of deep, forgotten power. This was not a diary of daily errands. This was something else entirely. I carried the book to the window, letting the meager light fall upon its pages, and began to read. The script was my grandmother's, unmistakable, yet fractured, erratic, as if her hand had trembled with each stroke. The initial entries were mundane, observations about the weather, garden notes, snippets of village gossip. But as I turned the brittle pages, the tone shifted. The lines grew shorter, more breathless. The spacing between words widened, then compressed. They speak of what was, what will be, and what is unmade. My breath hitched. Unmade. I thought of the clerk, his flat voice describing the fires, the quiet, the lack of shared memory. Further on, the entries became a tapestry of fear. The forgetting begins, one scrawled line declared, the letters clawing across the page. Small things at first, a name, a face, a turning of the season. Then larger, the shape of the town, the reason we built here. They looked like distorted maps, or perhaps skeletal structures. They built Oakhaven on a scar, a place where the world remembers differently. But we have failed. We are all failing. My grandmother's frantic hand had drawn a crude map of Oakhaven on one page, the lines wavering, almost dissolving at the edges. From this blotch, thin, jagged lines radiated outwards, like roots or veins, reaching towards the edges of the settlement, towards the mill, towards the distant hills. And within that central blotch, he had drawn one of the strange angular symbols, larger and more menacing than the others. The bloodline, a later entry, barely legible, screamed. It feeds on us through us. We are the conduits, the keepers, and the unwitting sacrifice. Our memories are its sustenance. The memory of Oakhaven, my memory. Cole, if you find this, remember, do not forget what they took. My grandmother's words echoed in my skull, a frantic chorus of forgotten truths. This town, my family, this legacy. It was all tangled in something ancient and hungry, something that devoured not flesh, but the very essence of being. And I, Cole, was standing at the precipice of its silent maw. I had to remember. Before Oakhaven, and I along with it, became nothing more than a ghost in a forgotten dream. A cold sweat pricked my skin. The air in the room grew heavy, oppressive, and I felt a profound sense of isolation, as if I were the last conscious mind left in a world slowly being unmade. The ink, faded with time, spoke of a slow erosion, a subtle forgetting, a creeping emptiness. It detailed not a singular event, but a gradual, insidious consumption. It was then I heard it. A sound so faint, so delicate, I almost dismissed it as the rustle of old paper or the sigh of the wind through broken panes. Not a single voice, but a multitude, like dry leaves skittering across a vast, empty plain. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, a barely perceptible current in the air, carrying no discernible words, only an impression of immense hushed activity. My gaze darted to the periphery. A flicker. When I turned, there was nothing but the settled dust motes dancing in the dying light. My breath hitched. It was a trick of the light, I told myself, a mind overstimulated by my grandmother's unsettling prose. I pushed myself to my feet, the journal still clutched in my hand. They prickled at my skin, raising goose flesh. This wasn't merely atmosphere. It was an invasion, a subtle encroachment on my senses. Driven by a desperate need for concrete evidence, I ventured out into the deepening gloom of Oakhaven. The streets were quieter than usual, even for this hour. The few townsfolk I encountered moved with an almost dreamlike detachment, their eyes vacant, their responses rote. I remembered the shopkeeper, a robust woman with a laugh that could fill the room. Her name, however, eluded me for a moment, then returned. He should be there, tidying up, preparing for the next day. But the door was locked. A hand-scrawled sign taped to the glass read, "Closed indefinitely." No explanation, no further details. I passed the old cannery, a sprawling, forgotten complex at the edge of town, its corrugated metal walls scarred with rust. The massive, sliding metal door of the cannery groaned on its ancient track, protesting my entry. It opened onto a descending corridor, steep and unlit. This was it. The floor was clean, almost unnaturally so, but coated in a fine layer of ancient dust. Along the walls, recessed into alcoves, stood archaic metal cabinets, their glass fronts opaque with age. What truly caught my attention, however, were the machines. They were not breathing, but drawing, a silent suction of the very air, the very essence of the place. They were covered in faded paper, some curling at the edges. Most were blank or bore illegible smudges, but one caught my eye. It was a calendar dated months ago. Several names were scribbled onto various dates, presumably for appointments or visits. Mrs. Albright, the librarian, Mr. Henderson, the baker. But then, on the last week visible, the names stopped abruptly. There were no crossouts, no canceled stamps, just blank spaces, as if the remaining days had simply ceased to exist for those individuals. I approached, my heart now a frantic drum against my ribs. Tucked beneath one of the humming machines, as if dropped in haste, was a small wooden bird. Hand-carved, painted in bright, cheerful blues and yellows. It was the same bird I'd seen a dozen times, perched on the counter of the general store, a gift from the shopkeeper's young grandson. Its presence here, in this desolate, forgotten place, was a brutal, undeniable revelation. She hadn't just closed indefinitely. He was gone. And perhaps, like the names on the calendar, he had simply ceased to be. They were not human, not animal. They were the sound of an immense hunger, a patient, ancient entity slowly, silently devouring its feast. I wasn't just isolated. I was a witness, an anomaly, a conscious mind in a place where consciousness was being systematically erased. And I was standing in its maw. The world, a stage set for a monstrous play, had receded with the dawn, leaving behind only the cold, sharp edges of determination. My grandmother's journal, a brittle map of forgotten fears, lay open on the passenger seat, its cryptic sketches an insistent whisper in the oppressive silence of Oakhaven. The town still slept, or rather, existed in its peculiar waking slumber, the collective mind a placid, unsettling pool. I was an intruder, a lone ripple, and the mill, according to the faded ink, was where the current began. The drive was short, a winding descent away from the clustered, uniformly vacant houses, past fields choked with weeds, their stalks brittle and gray under a sky the color of bruised pewter. It stood like a broken sentinel, a vast hulking edifice of blackened timber and crumbling brick, its windows shattered eye sockets staring blankly at the encroaching woods. A colossal water wheel, long since stilled, hung suspended like a broken limb, draped in moss and ivy, its spokes groaning softly in the wind that now began to keen around the building. This was not merely abandonment. It was a surrender to time, to rot, to a deeper, more profound oblivion. My boots crunched on fallen slate and shattered glass as I approached the main entrance, a gaping maw where heavy wooden doors had once hung. A pall of dust, undisturbed for decades, coated every surface. A fine, ghostly powder that shimmered in the weak shafts of light piercing the broken roof. The air was heavy with the smell of mildew, wet stone, and something else. A faint metallic tang, like old blood or rust, that prickled the back of my throat. The mill's interior was a cathedral of forgotten industry. Enormous gears, rusted solid, stood like petrified giants. Convoluted systems of belts and pulleys, once humming with purpose, now hung in tattered strips, resembling desiccated vines. Dust motes danced in the sparse light, each particle a tiny, frantic ghost. My breath plumed in the cold air, a visible testament to my presence in this forgotten tomb. I moved slowly, my footsteps echoing unnaturally in the vast space. The journal's clue was vague, a small drawing of an archaic symbol next to a rough sketch of a stone wall. Then I saw it. Tucked away in a dimly lit corner, behind a collapsed pile of timber and a heap of rotting sacks, a section of the wall was different. And etched into the central panel, half obscured by a thick layer of grime and lichen, was the symbol from my grandmother's journal. It was a complex design, a series of interlocking spirals that seemed to draw the eye inward, hinting at depths beyond mere surface. The pattern was ancient, alien, yet strangely familiar, stirring an echo in some deep, unexamined part of my mind. With a surge of adrenaline, I began to clear away the debris, my movements frantic now. The wood splintered, the sacks disintegrated into clouds of dust. As more light fell upon the wall, I saw that the carvings extended beyond the single symbol, forming a larger tapestry of unsettling motifs. Skeletal trees, faceless figures, and more spirals, each one drawing me deeper into its silent narrative. These were not decorative. They were instructions, a warning. My gaze followed the patterns, my mind racing, until a subtle irregularity caught my eye. A thin, almost imperceptible seam ran vertically down the wall, disappearing beneath the floorboards. I pressed against the slate panels, pushing, pulling, my muscles straining. Nothing. Then, remembering the journal's faint note about the silent turning, I paused. I ran my hand along the edge of the central carved panel, feeling for a hinge, a lever, anything. I twisted it. A low, grinding groan, deep and resonant, emanated from within the wall. Dust sifted from the ceiling. Slowly, agonizingly, a section of the carved slate wall, perhaps 8 feet high and 3 feet wide, began to recede inward, then pivot, revealing a passage behind it. It was a black maw, absolute and impenetrable. No light penetrated its depths. This was it, the heart of the mystery, the place where Oakhaven's memories went to die. I stood at the threshold, the journal now clutched tightly in my hand, its cryptic sketches no longer just ink on paper, but a map to a terrible truth. My resolve, though shaken, held. I had come too far, seen too much to turn back now. It lay folded now, tucked inside my coat, its ink-stained pages pressing against my chest like a desperate beating heart. Determination, cold and sharp, had replaced the fear that had gnawed at me through the long night. I was a man walking into a dream, or perhaps a nightmare from which I might never truly wake. The entrance was hidden behind a stack of rotting lumber in a forgotten corner of the mill's foundation, a narrow gap in the stone, barely wide enough for my shoulders. I switched on my powerful headlamp, its beam swallowed almost immediately by the profound, insatiable dark. One breath, then another. I squeezed through the opening, the rough stone scraping against my clothes, and began my descent. The passage was less a tunnel and more a wound in the earth. A rough-hewn bore sloping downwards at an unforgiving angle. The floor was uneven, slippery with dampness and loose scree. My light carved a small, frantic circle in the suffocating black, revealing walls of packed soil and exposed bedrock, laced with thick, fibrous roots that snaked like dormant veins. Each step echoed unnervingly, the sound swallowed and then spat back, distorted and amplified by the close confines. The air grew heavier, cooler, pressing in on me, stealing the breath from my lungs. I felt the immense weight of the earth above, a crushing, silent presence. The tunnel twisted, branched, and narrowed, a labyrinthine nightmare built by blind hands. I followed the subtle markers my grandmother had sketched in her journal. A peculiar notch in the rock, a cluster of fungi glowing with a faint, sickly luminescence. Time dissolved. My legs ached, my head throbbed, but the relentless pull of the mystery drove me deeper. I stumbled into a cavernous chamber, the walls here not of earth, but of some slick, obsidian-like rock that drank the light. Around it, scattered in a haphazard, disturbing circle, were bones. Not animal bones, I realized with a shudder as my lamp beam illuminated a clearly articulated femur, a rib cage. Human. Ancient, brittle, but unmistakably human. Their arrangement was unnatural, limbs splayed, skulls turned to face the altar as if caught mid-ritual, frozen in a final silent supplication. This wasn't just a passage, it was a charnel house. I pushed on, the image of those bones seared into my mind. The rough rock gave way to smooth, discolored linoleum, the earthen ceiling to stained acoustic tiles. The incongruity was jarring, a sharp, disorienting tear in the fabric of the underground. Fluorescent lights, long dead, hung crookedly from the ceiling, their plastic covers yellowed and cracked. It wasn't the sound of life support, but something more fundamental, more primal, like the slow, steady pulse of a sleeping titan. There were no gurneys, no IV stands, no medical equipment I recognized. Only these strange, silent machines, breathing. The hallway stretched, unnerving in its desolate uniformity. I walked its length, my boots echoing too loudly on the linoleum, a trespasser in a place that shouldn't exist. At the very end, where the hallway should have met a wall or another passage, the linoleum abruptly ended, giving way to a raw, pulsating mass that seemed to consume the very structure of the building. It was an organic growth, vast and sickeningly vibrant, like an enormous exposed organ. The air around it was warm, humid, and carried that same sweet metallic scent I'd noticed at the entrance, now intensely concentrated, almost suffocating. This was it, the source, the thing feeding on Oakhaven. My lamp beam trembled in my hand as I stared at the monstrous thing. It was immense, a living wall that stretched upwards into the unseen ceiling, its lower reaches disappearing into the earth. From its surface, slender, tendril-like filaments, almost transparent, stretched out like searching fingers, some embedded in the surrounding rock, others reaching into the empty air. And then I saw them, embedded within the crimson mass itself, half submerged, like flies caught in amber. Faint, shimmering motes of light, coalescing and dissipating, each one a fleeting spark of memory, drawn into the pulsing maw. A low thrum, deeper than the machines in the hallway, emanated from the growth, a sound that vibrated in my chest cavity, threatening to unravel me. It was not a roar of aggression, but a sound of consumption, of slow, patient hunger. My mind screamed, but my feet remained rooted. The chill in the air was not merely from the morning's breath, but from the unspoken dread that clung to the very stones of Oakhaven. Here, the tunnel smoothed into a long, dim hallway, lined with what appeared to be utility panels and sealed doors. Fluorescent tubes, half dead and flickering, pulsed with a weak, sickly light overhead, casting long, distorted shadows that danced like phantoms. A low thrum vibrated through the floor, a rhythmic, mechanical sighing that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. It felt clinical, yet utterly abandoned. No living soul moved through this sterile, quiet stretch. The air, though stale, carried a faint antiseptic tang, overlaid with the metallic scent of old machinery. It was a place of forgotten purpose, a subterranean annex perhaps, to some long-defunct industrial endeavor, now repurposed by the creeping thing beneath Oakhaven. The rhythmic breathing of the unseen mechanisms grew louder, pulling me deeper, past peeling paint and corroded conduits. Each step echoed, a solitary intrusion in a realm of enforced quiet. The light grew even fainter, until I relied on the weak beam of my flashlight, its cone cutting through the gloom like a desperate plea. The air thickened, heavy and still, carrying a strange, earthy perfume, mingled with the faint, cloying sweetness I'd noticed before. It was a scent that hinted at both decay and unnatural preservation. My breath caught in my throat, a shard of ice in my lungs. And within it, arranged in concentric circles around a central, pulsing luminescence, were the townsfolk. They lay or sat, motionless, their bodies arranged with an unsettling geometric precision. It cast their faces in a pallid, unearthly luminescence. The butcher, his massive frame utterly still, his eyes wide and vacant, fixed on the glowing core. The librarian, usually so precise and sharp-witted, her spectacles askew, a faint beatific smile on her lips. The young woman who ran the flower shop, her hands, usually stained with soil, now clasped loosely over her chest. And further in, closer to the light, I saw the baker, his face smooth, devoid of the worry lines I knew so well. Their faces, normally etched with the small concerns of Oakhaven life, were smoothed, featureless masks of serene emptiness. A low, collective hum, not quite a sound, but a vibration felt deep in the bone, resonated through the cavern. It was the sound of thoughts, not spoken, but shared, a confluence of fractured recollections and nascent emotions, flowing like a subterranean river. I saw the postman, his usual gruffness gone, a faint wistful smile playing on his lips as if reliving a long-lost summer afternoon. Beside him, the baker's wife, her hands usually busy kneading dough, lay still, her eyes fixed on nothing, a single tear tracing a path through the dust on her cheek. This was the collective mind, the vast, silent consciousness my grandmother had hinted at in her fragmented prose. They weren't merely present, they were absorbed, their individual identities dissolving into the shared current. Their memories, their emotions, their very essence were being siphoned, fed into the throbbing heart of the cavern, nourishing the ancient entity that pulsed within the light. A powerful, insidious warmth began to bloom in my chest, spreading outward, a seductive invitation. My own memories, sharp and distinct moments of joy and sorrow, began to feel like burdens, heavy stones I carried alone. To simply be, without the sharp edges of self, without the isolating burden of individual thought. The urge was profound, a yearning for peace, for surrender, for the quiet dissolution of coal. My hand instinctively went to my chest, feeling the hard edges of my grandmother's journal beneath my coat. The entity, unseen yet undeniably present, thrummed in the air, a silent, hungry conductor of this macabre orchestra of souls. It pulled at me, a gentle, insistent tug at the threads of my being, inviting me to join the silent communion. The faces of the townsfolk, so peaceful in their emptiness, seemed to beckon. Their shared consciousness, a vast warm ocean, promised an end to all struggle, all fear, all pain. It promised the ultimate belonging. But then, a flicker of my grandmother's fierce, independent spirit, a memory of her defiant gaze pierced through the seductive haze. This wasn't belonging. It was absorption. This wasn't peace. It was erasure. I was coal. I had a name, a history, a purpose. And to surrender it, to become merely a ripple in this vast, silent ocean, was to cease to exist. I had found the heart of Oakhaven's affliction, and it was reaching for mine. The chill in the air was not merely from the morning's breath. It was the residue of something vast and ancient, a presence that had almost claimed me. I scrambled, my limbs clumsy with terror and exhaustion, away from the gaping wound in the ground. The earth still thrummed, a low, resonant hum that vibrated in my teeth, a sound like a distant, communal sigh. My own thoughts felt tenuous, like smoke trying to hold shape in a stiff breeze. I could feel the subtle tug, a gentle, insidious invitation to let go, to merge, to cease the struggle of individuality. It was not pain, not hunger, but an overwhelming, seductive peace that promised oblivion. That was the true horror. Not a violent end, but a quiet, willing erasure. My boots slipped on loose shale, the metallic tang of damp rock filling my nostrils. I didn't look back. The air around the sinkhole felt heavy, thick with the weight of absorbed lives. The woods were a blur of skeletal branches, a tunnel of fear and frantic movement. I ran until my lungs burned, a raw, desperate effort to outpace the insidious pull that sought to dissolve me into the collective hum. Eventually, the trees thinned, giving way to the forgotten edges of Oakhaven. The old municipal building, a block of gray stone that had stood since my great-grandparents' time, loomed ahead, its windows like vacant eyes. It was a place of records, of names, of identities, perhaps a fragile sanctuary. The air inside was still, heavy with the scent of dust and mildewed paper. It was a pressure behind my eyes, a warmth that promised release if I just stopped resisting. My feet carried me deeper, down a flight of concrete stairs that spiraled into the earth. The air grew cooler, strangely filtered. I pushed through a heavy fire door, and the world shifted. The walls, once painted a pale, institutional green, were now flaking, revealing patches of bare concrete. Fluorescent light fixtures, long dead, hung like skeletal ribs from the low ceiling. The machines were not medical devices, but forgotten ventilation units, their ancient motors humming with a low, rhythmic pulse, like a slow, deep inhalation and exhalation. Pipes snaked along the ceiling, dripping condensation onto the cracked linoleum floor. This was no medical facility. It was an abandoned research wing, perhaps from a time when the town experimented with agricultural or geological surveys, now repurposed by the insidious entity. Here, in this strange, sterile tomb, the truth solidified. The quiet breathing of the machines mirrored the entity's own subtle, consuming rhythm. The machines were not just breathing, they were listening, absorbing. This wasn't about violence or death in the traditional sense. It was about erasure. I saw, with a horrifying clarity that pierced through the haze of my exhaustion, flashes of faces I knew. The postmaster, the old grocer, the children from the park. Their smiles, their anxieties, their individual quirks. All smoothed away, replaced by a uniform placidity, a silent, knowing emptiness. Their memories were not gone, but absorbed, integrated into a vast collective tapestry where individuality was a discarded thread. The entity didn't kill, it assimilated. It fed on the specificities of individual memory, growing stronger with each unique thought it consumed, until only a unified, silent hum remained. Oakhaven was not just being forgotten. It was being unmade, its people becoming mere echoes in a grand, silent chorus. My grandmother's journal felt heavier now, a beacon in the encroaching stillness. Her frantic scribblings, once maddeningly cryptic, now pulsed with a terrible clarity. He had known. He had fought. Her notes spoke of severing the root, of unmaking the web, of reclaiming the individual spark. He had understood that the entity's power lay in its connection to the town, a psychic umbilical cord. My breath hitched, a sudden, desperate intake of air. I looked at the faded, water-stained pages of her journal, the meticulous diagrams of ley lines and ancient springs. My grandmother had charted the entity's tendrils, its points of influence. The root she spoke of, the central nexus, was not just beneath the mill, but seemed to weave through the very bedrock of Oakhaven, anchoring itself to the collective unconscious of its inhabitants. A plan, desperate and terrifying, began to form in the shattered landscape of my mind. If the entity fed on collective memory, on the interconnectedness of Oakhaven, then the only way to fight it was to sever that connection. Not to destroy the town, but to disrupt the entity's grip on it. My grandmother's research detailed specific points, old well springs and forgotten burial grounds, places of potent, lingering energy. If I could activate them, perhaps, if I could redirect or overload the energy that the entity was siphoning, I could sever its hold. It was a gamble, an act of faith against an ancient, hungry intelligence. But the alternative was to become another quiet breath in this silent, forgotten hallway, another erased memory in the town that was slowly ceasing to exist. I clutched the journal, its brittle pages a promise, a burden, a final, desperate guide. I would not let Oakhaven become a ghost of a memory. The chill in the air was not merely from the morning's breath, but from the cavernous emptiness that now yawned where once stood industry. I knew, with a certainty that settled in my bones like cold ash, that the entity's hunger had only sharpened. Time, a river turning to ice, was running out for Oakhaven. My desperate search had led me to the forgotten wing of the old textile factory, a sprawling, skeletal structure on the town's forgotten edge. Decades ago, during a fleeting health crisis, this section had been briefly repurposed, its vast spaces partitioned into sterile-looking corridors. The low, rhythmic hum I heard was not a ventilator, but the ancient, failing ventilation system, its mechanical exhalations mimicking a slow, steady pulse in the deserted quiet. My boots scuffed on the cracked linoleum, the only sound apart from that mechanical breath and the frantic rustle of my grandmother's journal as I clutched it. My mind was a crucible, forging a plan from fear and flickering hope. The journal was my anchor, its delicate script a lifeline to a past the entity sought to erase. I needed to understand the weakness, the flaw in its ancient design, the way to sever its parasitic hold. My grandmother's last entry spoke of a memory weave, a ritual. I traced the spidery ink with a trembling finger, deciphering phrases about collective remembrance and the heart of Oakhaven. It wasn't enough to simply recall a memory. It had to be rewoven. I thought of the few I'd seen, those with momentary flashes in their eyes, like sparks in a deep well. The old librarian, his gaze occasionally sharpening with a lost thought. The solitary ferryman, whose eyes held a distant sadness, as if mourning something he couldn't name. Leaving the factory's eerie embrace, I moved with a new urgency, the journal tucked securely inside my coat. The streets of Oakhaven were unnervingly quiet, the townsfolk moving with that same placid, unseeing uniformity. Their eyes passed over me, registering nothing. It was like walking through a dream, except the dream was turning into a nightmare, and I was the only one awake. My first stop was the library, a place that, by its very nature, should have been a bastion against forgetting. His movements were precise, almost mechanical. "Excuse me," I said, my voice feeling impossibly loud in the hushed air. "I need to ask you something about Oakhaven's history." His head tilted, a slow, unnatural motion. His eyes, usually sharp behind thick spectacles, were cloudy. "History? We have no history here, only the present." I pulled out the journal, flipping to a faded sketch of the old town square, bustling with life, a celebration I'd never known. "Do you remember this?" I pressed, holding the page before him. "The Summer Solstice Festival? My grandmother wrote about it." A flicker. A tiny, almost imperceptible tremor passed through him. His eyes narrowed, a momentary confusion clouding their depth. And the children chasing fireflies." The words were hesitant, fragile, like shards of ice melting on a hot stone. But then the cloudiness returned, thicker this time. "No, I remember nothing of such things. Only the quiet." He returned to his blank books, his brief spark extinguished. A knot tightened in my gut. It was harder than I thought. The entity was actively suppressing these memories, fighting back. The journal held the key. I flipped through the brittle pages, searching for the memory weave. My grandmother's hand, usually so steady, had grown frantic in these final entries. She spoke of an anchor stone, a physical manifestation of Oakhaven's collective past, hidden deep beneath the roots of the oldest oak, the one that gave the town its name. This stone, she wrote, had been imbued with the town's most significant memories, a spiritual bulwark against dissolution. The entity wasn't just consuming memories, it was unraveling the weave, disconnecting the town from its anchor. The entity wasn't merely feeding on memory, it was replacing it with its own silent consciousness. It was attempting to become Oakhaven itself. And the memory weave wasn't just a ritual of remembering, it was a ritual of reassertion. a way to re-establish the town's true identity, to force the entity out. The journal revealed the final, crucial detail. The anchor stone was not just a symbol. It was a relic, carved with ancient symbols, and its power could only be reactivated by the collective will of those who truly remembered. It required a specific chant, a forgotten song, and the physical presence of something deeply personal, a tangible link to a cherished memory from each participant. This was why the entity sought to erase all personal history. It was vulnerable to the very thing it devoured. The stakes were impossibly high. I wasn't just fighting for Oakhaven's past. I was fighting for its very right to exist, for the souls of its inhabitants. It tasted of forgotten lives and disquieting cleanliness, a stark contrast to the damp earth I had grown accustomed to. The low, rhythmic hum of unseen mechanisms pulsed through the floor, a slow, mechanical heartbeat beneath my boots. My breath plumed faintly, a ghost in the sterile chill. This was not the Oakhaven I knew, not even the Oakhaven of fractured minds. My grandmother's cryptic death, the townsfolk's vacant eyes, the creeping assimilation. It all converged here, in this unnerving quiet. The memory of elderflower wine, its phantom sweetness on my tongue, and the fleeting image of children chasing fireflies, those fragile shards of my own past, were the only anchors I possessed. A single, unmarked door, heavier than it appeared, stood at the hallway's end. No handle, no lock, just a seamless expanse of brushed steel. As I approached, the rhythmic hum intensified, a low thrumming that resonated in my chest. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor passed through the door, as if something vast and alive stirred behind it. I pressed my palm against the cool metal, a wave of profound weariness washing over me, a suggestion to simply turn back, to forget. But the faces of Oakhaven, vacant and lost, swam before my eyes, sharpening my purpose. With a soft, almost inaudible sigh of displaced air, the door slid inward, revealing not another hallway, but a gaping vertical shaft. A faint, organic scent, like wet earth and something anciently sweet, wafted up, tinged with a faint electrical tang. A descent. This was it. I stepped into the elevator, a simple platform with no controls, and the door slid shut behind me with a soft click that echoed like a final pronouncement. The hum intensified, vibrating through my bones as the platform began its slow, deliberate drop. The air grew heavier, cooler, pressing against me. The descent was interminable, a journey into the very marrow of the world. My mind, a fragile vessel, braced against the unknown. Then the floor leveled. The platform eased to a stop, and the door hissed open once more. Before me stretched a cavern of impossible scale, a cathedral carved from the earth itself. But it was not rock that formed its walls. It was flesh. A vast, pulsating, organic mass, stretching beyond the reach of my vision, filled the space. Veins of phosphorescent light, like rivers of liquid starlight, threaded through its surface, illuminating strange, crystalline growths that shimmered with an inner luminescence. And the sound. The collective, fragmented memories of generations, not just from Oakhaven, but from before, stretched back into a past I couldn't comprehend. They swirled and merged, a current of pure consciousness, humming with an almost unbearable density. This was the entity. This was the core. It was a soft, insidious touch, a suggestion of belonging, of surrendering to the vastness. It offered peace, an end to the struggle, a dissolution into the whole. I recoiled, a gasp catching in my throat. This was not peace. This was annihilation. The entity pulsed, a slow, deliberate beat that echoed my own frantic heart. I saw flashes, a child's first steps, a lover's embrace, the taste of spring water, the warmth of a hearth. They were beautiful, seductive, but they were not mine. I focused on my own essence, the stubborn core of coal. These were my anchors, my weapons. I pushed back, not with physical force, but with the sheer weight of my individuality. I projected my own memories, not as fragments, but as whole, vibrant experiences. The scent of elderflower wine, rich and sweet, suddenly blossomed in the cavern, a discordant note in the entity's symphony. The entity recoiled, a subtle ripple passing through its vast form. It was surprised. It had expected surrender, not defiance. But it was ancient, vast, and relentless. It struck back, a torrent of raw, undifferentiated memories crashing against my mind. It wasn't seductive now. It was an assault. Faces I didn't know, fears that weren't mine, griefs that belonged to strangers, threatened to overwhelm me, to tear my consciousness into 1,000 pieces. I felt my own identity fraying at the edges, my sense of self dissolving under the immense pressure. My legs buckled. I dropped to my knees, clutching my head, trying to hold myself together against the psychic hurricane. I was losing. I could feel the edges of my mind blurring, the sweet oblivion of assimilation calling to me. No, not yet. My grandmother's face, clear and sharp, materialized in my mind's eye. Her eyes filled with a fierce, protective love. He had fought this. He had tried to warn me. I would not let her sacrifice be in vain. With a desperate primal surge of will, I focused every ounce of my being on a single coherent thought. I am coal. I exist. I wasn't trying to destroy it with physical force. I was trying to disrupt its coherence, to shatter its unified consciousness with the sheer, unyielding force of my own singular identity. I poured all my fear, all my love, all my rage, all my stubborn individual existence into that one defiant thought, pushing it outward like a spear into the vast pulsating heart of the entity. A shriek, not of sound, but of pure psychic agony, tore through the cavern. The phosphorescent veins of light within the entity pulsed violently, then flickered, some winking out entirely. The very ground trembled, a deep, resonant groan echoing from the earth. I had struck a blow, but at what cost? My own mind felt like a shattered mirror, countless fragments reflecting back a distorted, terrifying image of myself. I was still coal, but the edges were frayed, the connections tenuous. The entity, wounded, was thrashing, its immense power unleashed in a desperate final counterattack. I felt the immense pressure building again, threatening to crush me utterly, to finally erase me from existence. The silence, at first, was the loudest thing. It was not the oppressive, hungry void I had wrestled, but a fragile, brittle quiet, punctuated by the rhythmic sigh of unseen mechanisms. I lay suspended in a space that felt neither here nor there, my limbs heavy, my mind a fractured mosaic of echoes. A faint scent of antiseptic, thin and metallic, clung to the air. My eyes fluttered open to a world bleached of vibrancy. The low hum vibrated against my skull, a dull counterpoint to the phantom roar that still resonated deep within my marrow. And then, my grandmother's face, a beacon of defiance, a shared memory of love and lineage, a fierce, protective wall. I had thrown every sliver of myself against the encroaching tide, a desperate guttural scream of "I am coal." The machines beside me breathed, steady and indifferent. I pushed myself up, the rough texture of the sheet grating against my skin, my muscles stiff and protesting. There was no one to ask, no voice to guide. Only the machines, quietly breathing, their purpose unknown, their presence unsettling in this vacant space. The entity was disrupted. I knew this with an instinctual certainty, a cessation of the deep, pervasive hum that had once permeated the very ground beneath my feet. The sky above was the same pale, indifferent blue, yet the light felt different, thinner, as if a layer of memory had been stripped from the very atmosphere. The townsfolk moved like figures in a dream. Their faces, once subtly altered, now bore a starker emptiness. Their eyes, though no longer holding that uniform, placid sheen, often flickered with a profound confusion. I saw the shopkeeper, his hands fumbling with a stack of tinned goods, his gaze distant. He looked at me, a flicker of something almost recognition. Then a blankness descended, wiping the slate clean. "Cole," he murmured, his voice reedy, unsure. "You've been away." "I'm back," I replied, the words catching in my throat. He nodded slowly, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. Good to be back." He paused, then his brow furrowed. "Back from where exactly?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken loss. This was the cost. The entity, though thwarted in its ultimate assimilation, had left an indelible scar. It had torn at the delicate tapestry of shared experience, leaving gaping holes. I walked the familiar streets, now rendered alien by this pervasive amnesia. The general store, the old clock tower, even the winding path to the docks. They were all there, yet imbued with an unsettling fragility. I saw the elderly woman who used to tell me stories of my great-grandfather. She sat on her porch swing, humming a tune I recognized from my childhood, but when I spoke her name, her eyes widened with a polite, bewildered curiosity. "I'm sorry, dear," she said, her voice soft as dust. The town was no longer unified by a single invasive thought, but fragmented by 1,000 missing pieces. I found the elder, sitting by the hearth in his humble cottage, staring into the embers. His face, usually a roadmap of ancient wisdom, was etched with a new, profound weariness. "It is done," I stated, my voice hushed. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine. There was a spark there, a deep, sorrowful understanding that cut through the pervasive fog. "It is disrupted," he corrected gently. "Not vanquished, not truly. Its hunger remains, Cole. It has merely retreated to lick its wounds, to gather itself again. So many things. Some do. Fragments. Like shards of glass, reflecting only parts of a truth. Others are gone forever. The price of our freedom was dear." He sighed, a sound like rustling leaves. "The town it breathes, but its heart is fractured." The choice pressed down on me, a physical weight. Oakhaven, my ancestral home, was a wound, a sprawling scar on the landscape. Could I stay here, in this place of half-memories and quiet confusion? Could I dedicate my life to sifting through the wreckage, helping these broken people piece together lives that would forever have missing chapters? My gaze drifted towards the distant gray line of the sea,